For 5 years, I didn't receive a single message from my daughter. No Father's Day greeting, no Christmas phone call. Even when my brother died, she remained silent. For 1,825 days, I learned to accept the possibility that my daughter no longer considered me her father. Then, at 11:47 on Tuesday night, my phone vibrated on the kitchen table. I almost didn't open it, but when I saw the number, my heart began pounding. I recognized the number. I recognized the person behind it. Taylor, my daughter. 5 years after disappearing from my life, she had finally contacted me. My hands trembled as I opened her message, not because I was angry, because I was hopeful. I read the message 3 times. Dad, I saw your Facebook post. We need to talk. Friday, 7 p.m., Capitol Grill. Bring $150,000 with you, or don't bother showing up. I sat there in silence for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw the phone away. Another part wanted to call her and ask how a child could return to her father after 5 years only to ask for money. But there were 3 words in that message that kept me from closing the door completely. We need to talk. Those 3 words made me hope again. Maybe Taylor was in trouble. Maybe she regretted what she had done. Maybe 5 years had changed her. Maybe, after everything that had happened, my daughter finally wanted to come home. So I did something most people would probably regret. I replied to her message. I'll be there. I didn't know yet that Friday's dinner wasn't an invitation to reconcile. It was a transaction. My daughter didn't come alone. She came with the man she was going to marry, and together they had prepared a deal. $150,000 in exchange for getting my place as her father back. But they didn't know one thing. Before I went to the restaurant, I had already discovered something about my future son-in-law, the man who was about to become part of our family. Something that made me realize the $150,000 wasn't an ordinary request, because the man asking money from a father who had lost his daughter for 5 years was hiding something. And when I opened the folder I had brought that night, I realized I might not be going to the restaurant to save my relationship with my daughter. I was going to save my daughter from the man who was destroying her life. The problem was, she didn't want to be saved. And that night, I had to make the hardest decision of my life. Should I give $150,000 to the child I still loved? Or, for the first time in my life, should I let her face the consequences of her own choices? Because sometimes loving someone doesn't mean saving them from the fall. Sometimes love means letting them fall and waiting to see whether they're willing to stand on their own.
5 years. 1,825 days. Not one Father's Day message, not one Christmas call, not even a message when my brother died. I had finally accepted that my daughter was gone from my life. Then at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, my phone buzzed. It was Taylor, my daughter, the daughter I hadn't heard from in 5 years. My hand shook as I opened the message. I thought she was finally coming home. I thought she was finally ready to say she was sorry. Instead, I read 6 words that broke my heart all over again. Bring $150,000 or don't come. No, I miss you. No, I love you. No, Dad, can we talk? Just a price, $150,000. And the worst part? I actually went. Because buried inside that cruel message were 3 words that made me believe, just for a moment, that my daughter might still want her father back. We need to talk. I didn't know that when I walked into that restaurant 3 days later, I wasn't walking into a family reunion. I was walking into a trap, and the person sitting beside my daughter was about to reveal why she needed my $150,000 so desperately. But what I discovered about that man would change everything.
My name is Mike Anderson, and Taylor is my only daughter. For 28 years, she was the center of my life. I was there when she took her first steps. I was there when she learned to ride a bicycle, running behind her with one hand on the seat because I was terrified she would fall. I was there when she came home from school crying because her best friend had stopped talking to her. I sat beside her bed when she was sick, drove her to school when she was late, paid for her braces, her first car, and more mistakes than I could count. I never kept a record of any of it, because that's not what fathers do. You don't raise your child while keeping an invoice in your head. You simply give, and when they need you, you give again. That's why the message hurts so much. Not because she wanted $150,000, because after 5 years of silence, the first thing she wanted from me was money. Still, I couldn't stop myself from hoping there was more to it. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she didn't know how to come back. Maybe those 5 years had been as painful for her as they had been for me. So I walked through my house that night, remembering things I hadn't allowed myself to remember in years. I stopped outside Taylor's old bedroom. The door had been closed for 5 years. I put my hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn it. I could still picture her at 16, sitting on the floor with clothes scattered everywhere, complaining that she had absolutely nothing to wear. I could hear her laughing. I could hear her yelling. I could hear her calling me Dad. And for a few seconds, I wasn't standing in an empty hallway anymore. I was standing in the past. Back when she still needed me. Back when my presence meant something. I finally stepped away from the door. That's when I realized something painful. I wasn't going to that dinner because of the $150,000. I was going because some stubborn part of me still believed that somewhere underneath the anger, the distance, and the years of silence, my little girl was still there. And maybe Friday night would be the night she finally came home. I didn't know yet that the woman sitting across from me at that restaurant was going to make me question whether I had ever truly known my own daughter. And I certainly didn't know that the $150,000 she demanded was only the beginning.
I arrived at Capitol Grill at exactly 7 that evening. A light rain was falling as I stepped out of the car. I stood outside the restaurant for a few seconds, taking a deep breath and trying to convince myself that tonight wasn't about money. It was about Taylor, my daughter, after 5 years. I walked inside the restaurant and saw her immediately. She was sitting in a booth toward the back. Taylor. I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was styled differently. Her clothes were far more expensive than anything she used to wear when she lived at home. On her finger was an engagement ring that caught the warm restaurant lights every time she moved her hand. But her eyes were still the same. At least, I wanted to believe they were. I walked toward the table. She looked up at me. I waited. Maybe she'd stand. Maybe she'd hug me. Maybe she'd tell me she missed me. Instead, she simply said, "You came." I gave her a small smile. I said I would. That's it. 5 years. 1,825 days without hearing her voice, and the first thing she said to me was 2 words, like I'd shown up late for a business appointment. Then I saw the man sitting beside her, Devon, her fiancé. I'd never met him before. He stood and shook my hand. His smile looked friendly, too friendly. "Mike, right?" "Yes. I've heard a lot about you." I looked at Taylor. She wasn't smiling. I sat down. For the next few minutes, we talked about things that didn't matter. My work, the weather, the restaurant, the wedding. Then Devon asked, "So Taylor tells me you ran a business." I nodded. "Precision machining, 32 years. He leaned back in his chair. "Small operation?" I looked at him. "It started small." He gave me a thin smile. "That's respectable." There was something about the way he said it, as if 32 years of my life were nothing more than a small business that happened to make some money. I looked at Taylor. I waited for her to say something, to defend her father, to tell him that I had built everything from nothing, that the house she grew up in came from that work, that the first car she ever drove was paid for with money I earned from that business. But Taylor said nothing. She simply picked up her glass and took another sip of wine. That's when something inside me began to change. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to disappointment. I started realizing that maybe during those 5 years, I wasn't the only one who had changed. Taylor had changed too. Then she placed her glass back on the table. "Dad, we need to talk." My heart started beating faster. 3 words. 3 words that had brought me to this restaurant. I looked at her. "Okay, I'm listening." Taylor opened her purse. She pulled out a document, placed it on the table, then slowly pushed it toward me. I looked at the number printed across the top. $150,000. I raised my eyes. "What's this?" Taylor answered in a flat voice. "The agreement." I stared at her for a few seconds. "Agreement for what?" Devon answered. "The wedding." I gave a small laugh because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're asking me to pay for your wedding?" Taylor shook her head. "Not exactly." I waited. She took a breath. Then she said the sentence that slowly destroyed every bit of hope I'd carried into that restaurant. "It's an advance on my inheritance." I didn't answer immediately. I simply looked at my daughter. "Your inheritance?" She nodded. "You're not getting any younger, Dad, and you have more than enough." It felt like someone had slapped me. 5 years without a single call, 5 years without asking whether I was alive, 5 years without coming when her uncle died, and now she was sitting across from me, calculating how much money she would receive after I was gone. I looked at Devon. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked calm, as if this were the most normal business transaction in the world. Then Taylor said, "You drive a car worth almost $150,000. Don't tell me you can't afford this." I stared at her. I didn't even know how to respond. That car wasn't a gift from anyone. I bought it after I retired, after 32 years of working, after sacrificing almost my entire youth, and now it had become proof in her eyes that I had an obligation to give her money. I took a breath. "Taylor, is that why you contacted me?" She didn't answer. I asked again, "Because you saw my Facebook post?" This time she looked directly at me, and I already had my answer. Something inside my chest collapsed. On the drive to the restaurant, I imagined my daughter might want to make peace. I imagined she might say, "I'm sorry, Dad." I imagined she might finally want to hug me. But I was wrong. She hadn't come to get her father back. She had come to get her money. And the most painful part wasn't the amount. It wasn't the $150,000. What destroyed me was realizing that after 5 years, my daughter had finally come back to me only when she needed something from me. I looked at the document again. Then I looked at Taylor. "What happens if I say no?" Taylor answered without hesitation. "Then there's nothing for us to talk about." That sentence made the crowded restaurant suddenly feel completely silent. I looked at the child I had once carried when she was sick, the child who used to fall asleep against my chest during thunderstorms, the child who once called me her hero. Now she was sitting across from me, turning our relationship into a transaction. And for the first time that night, I stopped hoping. I started wondering, how long had they actually been planning this?
Before you leave, I want to ask you something. If your own child betrayed your trust, demanded $150,000 from you, and only came back after 5 years of silence because they needed your money, would you forgive them? Would you open your door and help them rebuild? Or would you finally say, enough is enough? There is no easy answer. Maybe you've experienced something similar. Maybe you chose forgiveness. Maybe you chose to walk away. Tell me what you would do in the comments. And if this story made you question what love really means, hit the like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. For more powerful stories about betrayal, family, revenge, consequences, and second chances, subscribe to Tribal Survival Feast. Because sometimes saying no isn't the opposite of love. Sometimes it's the only way love survives. Every betrayal leaves a scar. Every choice has a consequence. Every family has a story. I thought leaving that restaurant would hurt. I was wrong. What hurt was realizing that my daughter had already decided what I was worth. Not as a father, not as the man who raised her, not as the person who stayed when everyone else walked away. As a number. $150,000. I drove home that night without turning on the radio. The rain tapped against the windshield, and every few seconds the headlights of another car passed across the dashboard. I kept hearing Taylor's voice. "You came." Then, "If you walk out without giving us the money, don't expect me to ever call you again." 5 years of silence, and somehow, in less than an hour, she had managed to make me feel like I was the one abandoning her. When I got home, I walked into the kitchen and put the agreement on the table. I stared at it. Then I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to at the restaurant. The account receiving the $150,000 wasn't Taylor's account. It wasn't a wedding account either. It belonged to a company, Devon Financial Strategies, LLC. I read the name again, then a third time. Something about it bothered me. I opened my laptop. I told myself I wasn't investigating my daughter's fiancé. I was simply trying to understand where my money was supposed to go. But the first search changed everything. The company had a website. Beautiful photographs, expensive offices, Devon standing beside men in tailored suits, testimonials from supposed clients. Everything looked legitimate, almost too legitimate. I clicked on the company registration. The address didn't match the address listed on the website. I checked the business records. The company had only been registered a little over 2 years earlier. I leaned back in my chair. 2 years. That was around the same time Taylor had told me she met Devon. I kept searching, and then I found the first lawsuit. A former client had filed a claim against Devon's company, alleging that money placed into an investment account had disappeared. The case had been settled. No admission of wrongdoing, no dramatic headline. Just another closed case buried inside a public database. Most people would have stopped there. I didn't. 32 years running a precision machining business taught me something. When a machine makes one strange noise, you don't ignore it because the machine is still running. You find out where the noise is coming from, because one small defect can be the first sign of something much bigger. So I kept digging. Another lawsuit, then another. Different names, different amounts, but the same pattern.
Clients complaining about missing funds, delayed withdrawals, promises of returns that never materialized. I felt my stomach tighten. Then I found something even worse, a regulatory filing. Devon's firm had been asked to provide financial records. I read the document slowly. Then I read it again. There were questions about client funds, questions about transfers, questions about accounts connected to other companies. And suddenly, the $150,000 didn't look like wedding money anymore. It looked like emergency money, money someone desperately needed. I checked the date of the latest filing, 3 weeks earlier. I looked back at the agreement sitting on my kitchen table. Monday. The money had to be transferred by Monday. Why? Why would a wedding require $150,000 that urgently? I searched Devon's name again. This time I found a court record that made me sit completely still. A creditor was seeking repayment. The amount was enormous, and Devon's name appeared alongside several business entities I had never heard of. Shell companies, holding companies, addresses that led to empty offices and mailboxes. My heart started beating faster. I called Taylor. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I opened the agreement and looked at the bank information one more time. The account wasn't simply connected to Devon. It was connected to one of the companies named in the court filings. I stared at the screen. Then I whispered something I didn't want to believe. Taylor doesn't know. That was the only explanation I could live with, because if she knew, then I didn't know my daughter at all. I spent the next 2 hours printing everything I found, the lawsuits, the business registrations, the court records, the regulatory filing, the account information. By 3 in the morning, my kitchen table was covered with papers. I placed them into a plain manila folder, the same kind of folder I used for quality control reports back when I still ran my shop. I sat there in the darkness. The house was silent, and for the first time in 5 years, I had a reason to call my daughter that had nothing to do with money. I wanted to save her. I picked up my phone. Her name was still at the top of my contacts. I pressed call. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I almost left a message, but I stopped, because I remembered the way she looked at me across that restaurant table. Cold, impatient, certain that I was going to give her what she wanted. So I put the phone down. If I called her now, she might think I was trying to take control of her life again. I needed proof, not suspicion, not anger. Proof. And if what I had discovered was real, I wasn't just dealing with a daughter who wanted $150,000. I was dealing with a man who might be using my daughter to get it. The next morning, I woke up after barely sleeping. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started digging again. This time, I searched for every company connected to Devon. That was when I found the name that made my blood run cold. A company that had received money from one of Devon's investment accounts had also transferred money to a private account connected to someone in Taylor's wedding party. I stared at the transaction. Then I stared at the date. It happened 2 days before Taylor sent me that message, bring $150,000. I pushed my chair away from the desk. Suddenly, the entire timeline looked different. The message, the deadline, the wedding, the account, the lawsuits, none of it was random. Someone needed $150,000, and my daughter had been sent to ask me for it. I didn't know whether Taylor was part of the plan. I didn't know whether she was being manipulated, but I knew one thing. I could no longer walk into that situation believing I was simply helping my daughter. I was walking into something much bigger. And if I was right, the $150,000 wasn't going to save my daughter's future. It was going to keep a collapsing lie alive. I closed the laptop. Then I looked at the manila folder sitting beside it. Friday night, I had walked away from my daughter because she wanted my money. Now I knew I had to go back, not to give her the $150,000, but to show her what that money was really going to buy. And I already knew there was a chance she wouldn't believe me, because sometimes the hardest person to convince isn't the person you're trying to save. It's the person who has already decided that you are the enemy. And Taylor had spent 5 years deciding exactly that.
By the time I walked back into the Capitol Grill, I had stopped hoping Taylor would understand me. I had one goal: get her to understand the truth. I arrived early and chose a table where I could see the entrance. The manila folder was sitting beside me. Every page inside it represented something I had discovered about Devon. Every lawsuit, every suspicious company, every court filing, every financial connection. I had spent 2 nights putting it together, and now I was about to find out whether my daughter would believe me. Taylor arrived at exactly 7. Devon was with her. The moment he saw the folder, his expression changed, just for a second, but I saw it. He knew. He knew exactly what was inside. Taylor sat down. She looked at the folder, then at me. "What is that?" I pushed it toward her. "Everything I found about Devon." Devon immediately reached for it. I put my hand on top of the folder. "No." He looked at me. "If you have something to say, say it." I looked directly at Taylor. "I want you to read it first." Devon laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was confident, almost amused. "Mike, you spent 2 days searching public records, and now you think you've uncovered some massive conspiracy?" I didn't answer him. I opened the folder. I placed the first lawsuit on the table, then the second, then the corporate records, then the regulatory filing. Taylor picked up the first page. Her eyes moved slowly across the document. I watched her face. At first, she looked confused, then uncomfortable, then defensive. "What am I looking at?" I said. "A lawsuit filed by one of Devon's former clients." Devon leaned forward. "That case was settled." I looked at him. "I know." I placed another document on the table. So was this one. Another. And this one. Taylor looked at Devon. "Devon?" He reached for her hand. "Taylor, these are old allegations." She didn't take her eyes off him. "Is that true?" He nodded. "Yes." I watched the tension build between them. Then I placed the final document in front of Taylor. "This one isn't old." She looked down. Her expression changed. The filing was only 3 weeks old. There were questions about client funds, questions about transfers, questions about the company's accounts. And then she saw the date of the hearing, Monday. The same Monday they had demanded my $150,000. Taylor looked up. "Why does this say Monday?" Devon didn't answer. She asked again. "Devon, why does this say Monday?" He finally spoke. "It's a procedural hearing." I shook my head. "No." He looked at me. I continued. "It's connected to the money you're asking me for." Taylor's face went pale. "What money?" I looked at her. "The $150,000. She turned toward Devon. "You told me that was for the wedding." Devon sat completely still. Then he said something I will never forget. "It is." I slid the bank information across the table. "Then why does the money go to your company?" Taylor looked at the document. Her eyes moved from the account number to Devon. "You told me it was a wedding account." Devon reached for the paper. "It is a business account. We use it for expenses." Taylor pulled the paper away. "What expenses?" He didn't answer. For the first time since I had met him, Devon looked trapped. And then he made his biggest mistake. He looked at me and said, "You have no idea what you're talking about." I leaned forward. "Then explain the missing client funds." Silence. "Explain the shell companies." Nothing. "Explain why your company is facing financial action on Monday." Taylor looked at him.
She was no longer looking at me. She was looking at him, and I could see it happening. The story she had believed for 2 years was beginning to crack. Devon reached across the table. "Taylor, listen to me." She pulled her hand away. "Don't touch me." I stayed seated. I didn't say anything, because this wasn't my moment. It was hers. She looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw something familiar in her eyes. Fear. Not fear of me, fear of the possibility that I had been right. She whispered, "Dad." I waited. She looked at the folder, then back at me. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because the answer was painfully simple. I tried. She looked down. I continued, "You wouldn't listen." She closed her eyes, and for a moment, the woman sitting across from me disappeared. I saw the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder, the girl who once believed her father could fix anything. Then she opened her eyes. What do I do? That question nearly broke me, because I had spent 5 years wishing she would ask it. But now that she finally had, I couldn't give her the answer. I looked at her. "You make your own choice." She started crying. Devon immediately tried to step between us. "Taylor, this is exactly what your father wants." She turned toward him. "What does that mean?" He froze. She stepped closer. "What exactly are you saying?" He didn't answer. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her face changed. She answered. I couldn't hear the other person, but I watched the color drain from her face. "What do you mean the account is frozen?" Devon suddenly grabbed her wrist. "Hang up." She pulled away. "Don't touch me." Everyone in the restaurant was looking now. The call ended. Taylor stared at Devon. "What did you do?" He said nothing. Then her phone rang again. This time, she looked at the screen for several seconds before answering. Her voice was barely audible. "Hello?" She listened, then whispered, "Okay." She hung up. She looked at me. Her eyes were filled with tears. "Dad." I stood. "What happened?" She swallowed. "They froze the accounts." The restaurant suddenly felt completely silent. Devon walked toward the exit. I watched him. Taylor didn't follow. She stood there beside the table, staring at the man she had planned to marry. And I realized something. The $150,000 had never been about a wedding. It had never been about Taylor's future. It had never been about giving my daughter a better life. It had been about keeping Devon's collapsing world alive for a few more days. And Taylor had unknowingly been the person he sent to get the money. I picked up the folder. I looked at my daughter. "Now you know." She cried. "I'm sorry." I wanted to hug her. Every part of me wanted to, but I stopped myself, because this time she needed more than her father to rescue her. She needed to face the truth. I looked toward the door. Devon was already gone, and I knew something else. This wasn't over. Because if his accounts had just been frozen, then the next thing that happened would be much bigger than a failed wedding. It would involve the police, the courts, and everyone who had trusted him with their money, including my daughter. I looked at Taylor one last time. "Go home." She whispered, "Where?" I answered quietly, "Anywhere that's safe." Then I walked away. But as I stepped outside into the rain, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. A man's voice said, "Mr. Anderson, we need to talk about Devon." I stopped walking, because in that moment I realized something terrifying. Someone else had been investigating him too.
By the time I got home that night, I knew the situation had changed. This wasn't about a father refusing to give his daughter $150,000 anymore. It wasn't even about Devon. It was about what happened next. I kept thinking about the phone call. "Mr. Anderson, we need to talk about Devon." I didn't know who the man was. I didn't know how he had my number, and I certainly didn't know what he wanted from me. So I didn't call him back. Not yet. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the folder. The same folder I had carried into the restaurant. The same folder Taylor had refused to believe. Now she knew, and there was nothing I could do to take that knowledge away from her. I went to bed sometime after midnight. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Taylor standing beside that table. Her face, her confusion, the moment she realized that the man she was about to marry had lied to her. But underneath all of that, there was another thought I couldn't shake. She had been willing to sacrifice our relationship for him. She had threatened never to speak to me if I didn't give her the money. And now that the money was gone, I didn't know what she would do. The next morning, I woke up to a dozen missed calls, 3 from Taylor, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, and 1 voicemail. It was from the same man who had called me the night before. I played it. His voice was calm, professional. "Mr. Anderson, my name is Daniel Reeves. I'm working with the federal investigation into Devon's financial activities. We need to ask you some questions regarding the $150,000 transfer request." I stopped the recording, then played it again. Federal investigation. I sat down. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the wall. The entire situation had just become much bigger than I imagined. I called Daniel back. He answered immediately. He asked me to come in. I agreed. Before leaving, I looked at the manila folder one more time. I took it with me. At the federal office, Daniel explained that Devon had been under investigation for months. Several clients had reported missing money. Some had lost their retirement savings. Others had taken out loans after Devon promised them guaranteed returns. The investigation had been building quietly, but they were missing one thing. They needed to understand how Devon was obtaining new money to keep the operation alive. Then Daniel looked at me. "Your daughter's $150,000 request may have been part of that investigation." I felt sick. I asked him whether Taylor was involved. He shook his head. "We don't know." That answer bothered me. I needed to know. Daniel continued. Devon had apparently been moving money between several accounts. When one account became short, money from another client was used to cover it, then another, then another. It was a cycle. And according to the investigators, Devon needed a large amount of fresh cash to keep that cycle going. My $150,000. It wasn't supposed to fund a wedding. It was supposed to buy him time. I thought about Taylor. She had been used, but she had also used me, and both things could be true at the same time. Daniel asked me whether I still had the original agreement. I said yes. He asked whether I would hand it over. I hesitated. That document had been the symbol of everything that had happened between my daughter and me, but I knew what I had to do. I gave it to him. He placed it inside an evidence bag, and just like that, the piece of paper that had nearly destroyed my relationship with my daughter became part of a federal investigation. When I left the building, I sat inside my car for almost 10 minutes. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there. I had spent years believing that money was the thing that could protect the people I loved, pay for school, pay for a car, pay medical bills, help someone start a business, give my daughter a comfortable life. But that day I realized something. Sometimes money doesn't protect people. Sometimes it gives the wrong person more power. My phone rang. Taylor. I answered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I heard her crying. "Dad?" I closed my eyes. "I'm here." She whispered, "I don't know what to do." I wanted to say, "Come home." I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew that would be a lie. So I said, "Start with the truth." She cried harder. I was wrong. I didn't answer immediately.
Then she said something I had waited 5 years to hear. "I'm sorry." 2 simple words, but they didn't erase 5 years. They didn't erase the restaurant. They didn't erase the $150,000 demand. They didn't erase what she had said to me, and I didn't pretend they did. I told her, "I'm glad you finally see what happened." She asked, "Can I come home?" That question broke something inside me, because 5 years ago I would have opened the door before she even asked, but I wasn't the same man anymore. I said, "You can come home." She started crying again. Then I added, "But we're going to have rules." Silence. No more lies. Another pause. No more asking me for money to solve problems you created. She whispered, "Okay." "And you're going to get help." She agreed. Then I said the hardest thing. "I'm your father, Taylor. I will always love you, but I won't rescue you from every consequence." She didn't argue. For the first time in years, she simply listened. 3 weeks later, Devon was formally charged. The wedding was canceled. His company was dismantled. More victims came forward. And the $150,000, it never left my account, not $1. Taylor eventually moved back home temporarily. The first few weeks were difficult. There were arguments, there were tears, there were nights when she blamed herself. There were mornings when I wanted to tell her that everything was forgiven just because I missed having my daughter around. But forgiveness isn't the same as pretending nothing happened. So we worked through it, slowly, one conversation at a time, one honest answer at a time. And months later, something happened I never expected. Taylor walked into the kitchen one morning. She put 2 cups of coffee on the table. Then she sat down across from me. No documents, no requests, no excuses, just my daughter. She looked at me and said, "Dad, I don't need anything." I smiled. "Then why are you here?" She smiled through tears, "Because I wanted to have breakfast with my father." That moment I finally understood. The $150,000 hadn't saved my daughter. Refusing to give it to her hadn't destroyed her either. It had forced us to confront something we had avoided for years. Love without boundaries can become enabling, and boundaries without love can become punishment. But somewhere between those two, there is something called responsibility. I never got the 5 years back. I never got to relive her childhood. I couldn't erase the things she had said, and she couldn't erase the things I had failed to understand as a father. But we could choose what happened next. And sometimes that's the only part of the story we actually control. I didn't save my daughter by giving her $150,000. I saved what was left of our relationship by finally saying no.
By Monday morning, the story was no longer private. It was on television, it was on social media, and my daughter's face was everywhere. I was sitting in my living room when the local news interrupted the morning program. The anchor's voice became serious. "Breaking news this morning out of North Hills." I looked up. Then I saw the photograph. Devon. The same man who had sat across from me at the Capitol Grill. The same man who had smiled while asking me for $150,000. The same man my daughter had defended. Now his face was beside the words, "Federal Fraud Investigation." I turned up the volume. The reporter explained that federal investigators had been examining Devon's financial activities for months. Several clients were claiming their retirement accounts had been drained. Some had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. One elderly couple had reportedly lost almost everything they had saved for retirement. Then the reporter said something that made me sit forward. Investigators believe the suspect may have attempted to secure additional funds from a family member shortly before the company's accounts were frozen. They didn't mention my name, but I knew it was me. My $150,000. The demand, the agreement, the deadline. Everything suddenly made sense. Then the screen changed. A photograph of Devon and Taylor appeared. Their engagement photo. She was smiling. He had his arm around her. They looked happy, successful, untouchable. The caption underneath read, "Local couple's dream wedding collapses amid financial scandal." I stared at the screen. My daughter had no idea her face was about to become part of a story she couldn't control. My phone started buzzing. One message, then another, then another. People from my old business, neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had seen the news. One message simply said, "Mike, is that your daughter?" I didn't answer. Another said, "I'm sorry, I hope you're okay." I put the phone face down. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want anyone talking about my daughter. But the world doesn't ask permission before it judges you. By noon, the story had spread across social media. People were sharing Devon's arrest records. They were sharing photographs from the engagement party. Someone had even found Taylor's social media account. The comments were brutal. How could she not know? She was obviously in on it. Her father probably knew. Looks like the whole family was involved. I read that last comment twice. Then I closed the app. Because that was the part people didn't understand. They saw a photograph. They saw a headline. They saw a beautiful woman standing beside a successful man, and they thought they knew the entire story. They didn't know about the 5 years of silence. They didn't know about the $150,000 demand. They didn't know about the restaurant. They didn't know about the folder sitting on my kitchen table, and they certainly didn't know that I had tried to warn my daughter before any of this happened. That afternoon, Taylor called me. Her voice was barely recognizable. "Dad," she started crying. I didn't say anything. She continued, "Everyone knows." I closed my eyes. "I know. They're saying I helped him." Her voice broke. "They're saying I knew about the money." I said, "Did you?" Silence. Then she whispered, "No." I believed her, but belief didn't change what was happening. She asked, "What am I supposed to do?" I wanted to tell her to fight back, to explain everything, to post the truth, to tell everyone that she didn't know. But I stopped myself, because public humiliation has a strange way of making people desperate, and desperate people make bad decisions. I told her, "Don't respond to anyone." "But they're destroying me." "Let them talk." She cried, "How can you say that?" I answered quietly, "Because you don't owe strangers an explanation." There was a long silence. Then she said, "I should have listened to you." Those words hurt more than I expected, not because I wanted to hear them, but because I knew they had come too late. I told her, "You don't need to punish yourself forever because you made one terrible decision." She whispered, "It wasn't one decision, Dad." I didn't respond. She continued, "I ignored you for 5 years." That was the first time she said it out loud. 5 years. Not 5 weeks, not 5 months, 5 years. She had spent 5 years believing that I was the enemy, and now, in less than a week, the entire world had turned against her. She asked if she could come over. I said yes. She arrived that evening wearing the same coat she had worn the night of the restaurant. She looked exhausted. No makeup, no jewelry, no designer dress, just my daughter. She stood at the front door, and for a moment neither of us knew what to say. Then she looked at me. "I'm sorry." I stepped aside. She walked inside, but she didn't hug me. Neither did I. Not yet. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I first read her $150,000 message. She looked around. Then she noticed the old photograph of us sitting beside the refrigerator, her graduation. She picked it up. Her fingers started shaking. "I remember this day." "I do too." She looked at the picture. Then she started crying. How did I become this person? I sat across from her. I didn't have an easy answer, because the truth was, I didn't know.
People don't wake up one morning and suddenly become someone they don't recognize. It happens slowly. One compromise, one excuse, one lie, one person they trust too much, one person they stop listening to, and eventually they look in the mirror and wonder when they became someone else. Taylor wiped her eyes. "Do you hate me?" I looked directly at her. "No." She looked surprised. "After everything I said?" I was hurt. I paused. "But I never stopped being your father." She broke down, and this time I reached across the table, not to fix her, not to give her money, just to remind her that she wasn't completely alone. She took my hand, for the first time in 5 years. But then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Her expression changed immediately. I asked, "What is it?" She turned the phone toward me. It was a message from an unknown number. Only 6 words. "You have no idea who helped him." Taylor looked at me. I looked back at her. And suddenly, the public humiliation wasn't the worst part anymore. Because if that message was telling the truth, Devin had not been working alone, and someone else was still out there.
The next morning, I stopped asking myself whether Taylor was making a bad decision. I started asking a much harder question. Who was really behind the $150,000 demand? I had spent the entire night thinking about what happened at the restaurant. Taylor hadn't asked me for the money like a daughter asking her father for help. She had delivered the demand like someone following instructions. The amount was exact, the deadline was exact, and the money wasn't even supposed to go into her account. It was going to Devin's company. That bothered me more than anything else. So I opened my laptop again, and I typed Devin's full name into the search bar. This time, I wasn't looking for a website. I was looking for a pattern. The first thing I found was his company registration, Devin Financial Strategies, LLC, registered 2 years earlier. I wrote down the date, 2 years. That was around the same time Taylor had started talking about him. I opened the corporate records. The registered address was in a downtown office building. I searched the address. It wasn't an office occupied by Devin's company. It was a commercial mail service. That was the first crack. I kept going. The company website claimed Devin had built a successful investment business with a growing list of private clients. But when I searched the public records, I couldn't find the names of several people listed as partners. No professional history, no business registrations, nothing. It was as if some of them didn't exist. I sat back in my chair. That was when I stopped thinking I was dealing with a questionable businessman. I started wondering if I was dealing with a completely fabricated operation. I searched for lawsuits. The first one appeared within minutes. A former client claimed that money invested through Devin's company had not been returned. The case had been settled. I opened another. Different client, different amount, same basic complaint, missing funds. I kept searching. A third case, then a fourth. My coffee went cold beside the laptop. I didn't notice. I was too focused on the names. Then I found something that made me stop. One of the companies named in a lawsuit was connected to another company. That company was connected to a third company, and the third company shared the same registered address as Devin's business. Different names, different paperwork, same network. I wrote everything down. Then I searched the bank information from the agreement Taylor had given me. The account receiving my $150,000 belonged to one of those companies. I stared at the screen. There it was, the connection I had been looking for. The money wasn't simply going to Devin. It was going into the same network of companies that appeared repeatedly throughout the legal records. I printed the page. Then I searched the company's financial history. That's when I found the second major problem. The company had outstanding debts, large ones. There were court judgments, unpaid obligations, and a hearing scheduled for Monday morning.
the exact same Monday when Devon wanted my money. I leaned back. My hands were completely still. That was when the story finally made sense. The deadline wasn't about the wedding. It was about survival. Devon needed fresh cash before something happened Monday. I looked at the agreement again. $150,000 by tomorrow morning. Then I looked at the court record. Monday hearing. The two dates were too close. I called my old attorney. He had known me for years. When I explained what I had found, he didn't interrupt. He simply listened. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, "Mike, don't send the money." I asked him why. He told me that none of the individual records necessarily prove criminal conduct, but taken together, they created a pattern that he wouldn't ignore. Multiple companies, overlapping addresses, repeated lawsuits, financial obligations, and a large cash request with an immediate deadline. Then he asked me the question I had been avoiding. "Does your daughter know?" I didn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. So I called Taylor. She answered after a few rings. Her voice was cold. "Dad." I said, "I need you to listen to me." She sighed. "If this is about Devon, I'm not doing this again." I said, "Did he tell you why he needs the $150,000? Silence. A few seconds passed. Then she said, "For the wedding." I asked, "Why does the money have to go into his business account?" Another silence. This one was longer. "He handles the finances." I said, "Taylor, that's not an answer." She became defensive. "You don't trust anyone I choose." I took a breath. "I'm not asking you to trust me." I paused. "I'm asking you to check." She said nothing. So I gave her the name of the first lawsuit, then the second, then the company address. I told her about the court hearing. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't accuse Devon of being a criminal. I simply gave her the facts. Then I said, "Please don't transfer any money." Her voice became quiet. "Are you sure?" I answered, "No." That surprised her. I continued, "I'm not sure what Devon has done. That's why I'm investigating." She didn't say anything. Then she asked, "Why are you doing this?" That question hurt, because the answer was obvious to me. I said, "Because you're my daughter." She whispered, "After everything I've done?" I closed my eyes. Yes. The call ended shortly afterwards. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. About an hour later, my phone buzzed. A message from Taylor. Only one sentence. "Dad, I found something." I stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. Devon never told me about the company debt. And then the third message, the one that changed everything. But I found another account with my name on it. I stopped breathing for a second, because if Taylor's name was connected to another account, then this wasn't just about stealing my money. Someone might have been using my daughter without her knowledge. I called her immediately. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A man's voice said, "Mr. Anderson, you need to stop looking into Devon." I stood up. "Who is this?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "You don't understand what you're getting involved in." The line went dead. I stood there in the kitchen with the phone pressed against my ear. For the first time since this started, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Fear. Not for my money, not for my reputation, for my daughter. Because now I knew something I hadn't known when I walked into that restaurant. The $150,000 wasn't just a demand, it was bait, and somehow my daughter had been placed directly in the trap. I thought I had finally figured out the truth. Devon was a fraud. He had lied to my daughter. He had used her relationship with me to get access to my money. And for the first time in 5 years, I believed I knew exactly who the victim was. My daughter. I was wrong.
It started with one message. Taylor had sent it to me that afternoon. "Dad, I found something." I had expected her to send me another document, another lawsuit, another piece of evidence against Devon. Instead, she sent me a screenshot. I opened it, and my entire body went cold. It was an email from Taylor to Devon, sent 11 days before she ever contacted me. The subject line read, "My Dad." I stared at the screen. Then I read the first sentence. "He won't give us anything unless he thinks I'm serious about cutting him off." I stopped breathing. I read it again, then again. My first thought was that the message had to be fake. It had to be edited. There was no way my daughter had written those words. Not my Taylor. Not the little girl whose height I had marked on a doorframe. Not the daughter I had spent 5 years hoping would come home. I called her immediately. She answered. Her voice was shaking. "Dad." I asked one question. "Did you send Devon this email?" Silence. A long silence. Then she said, "Yes." I closed my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Everything I had believed the last several days collapsed. I had thought Devon had manipulated Taylor into asking me for money, but the email proved something different. Taylor had been involved in the plan. Maybe not the entire plan. Maybe she didn't know about the fraud. Maybe she didn't understand what Devon was doing with the money. But she had knowingly tried to manipulate me. I asked her why. She started crying. "Dad, please let me explain." I said, "You have 5 minutes." She cried harder. Then she told me the part I had never known. 2 weeks before the $150,000 demand, Devon had told her that they were facing a financial problem. He said it was temporary. He told her that one investment had been delayed. He told her they needed money to cover a business obligation. And then he told her something else. He said the only person who could help them was me. Taylor resisted, at first. She told him I hadn't spoken to her years. She told him I wouldn't just hand over $150,000. That's when Devon suggested something. He told her to make me believe that I had to choose between my money and my daughter. He told her that if I thought she was serious about cutting me out of her life, I'd panic. And apparently, I did exactly what he predicted. Except there was one problem. I never gave him the money. Taylor's voice cracked. I thought it was just manipulation. I didn't answer. She continued. I didn't know about the other investors. I didn't know he was using someone else's money. I didn't know about the accounts. I looked at the screenshot again. The words were still there. He won't give us anything unless he thinks I'm serious about cutting him off. I asked her, "Why did you say us?" She didn't answer. That one word hurt more than the $150,000, because it meant that, at least for a while, there had been a team, Taylor and Devon, against me. I asked her if she knew exactly where the money was supposed to go. She said yes. I asked if she knew Devon's company was in financial trouble. She said she knew they were having problems. I asked if she knew about the lawsuits. She said no. I believed her. But belief wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. I told her, "You didn't know he was a criminal." She whispered, "I know." I said, "But you knew you were manipulating your father." She started sobbing. There was nothing she could say to change that. And then came the second reversal. Taylor sent me another screenshot. This one was from Devon. The message had been sent the night before our dinner. It said, "If he refuses, don't worry. I have another way to get the money." I stared at those words, another way. I asked Taylor what that meant. She didn't know. But suddenly I remembered something. The unknown phone call. The man who warned me to stop investigating. The message saying, "You have no idea who helped him."
I realized Devon had never been depending entirely on me. The $150,000 was only one part of a much larger plan. My money was the backup. Taylor was the leverage, and whatever Devon had planned next, it was already moving. I called Daniel Reeves, the investigator. I told him about the email. I sent him the screenshots. He called me back less than 20 minutes later. His voice was different this time, more serious. He asked me one question. Does Taylor still have access to Devon's accounts? I asked her. She checked. Then she froze. Dad. I asked what happened. She whispered, "There's an account I don't recognize." I asked her to send me the information. She did. The account was opened in her name, but Taylor hadn't opened it, and there was something inside it, a transfer history, several deposits, several withdrawals, and a final transfer scheduled for Monday morning. The amount? $150,000. I stared at the screen. Suddenly, the entire story looked different again. Devon hadn't simply asked me for $150,000. He had created a financial trail that could make it appear that Taylor had received the money herself. If the transfer happened, her name would be attached to it. Not mine, not Devon's, hers. I called Daniel again. He told me not to touch the account, not to move anything, not to delete anything, just preserve the evidence. Then he said something that I will never forget. "Mr. Anderson, your daughter may not be the person we're investigating." He paused, "but someone may be trying very hard to make her look like one." I sat there in silence. That was the moment I understood the real betrayal. Taylor had betrayed my trust. Devon had betrayed Taylor, but someone else had been preparing to make Taylor take the blame for everything. And suddenly, the $150,000 wasn't simply a bait, it was a trap designed to leave my daughter holding the evidence. I looked at the clock. Monday morning was less than 12 hours away, and somewhere in the city, Devon knew that his plan was collapsing, which meant he had one last decision to make: disappear or come after us. I didn't know which one he would choose, but I knew one thing. The next time my daughter saw Devon, she wouldn't be meeting the man she thought she was going to marry. She would be meeting the man he had been hiding all along.
By Sunday night, there was no more pretending. The wedding was over. The money was still in my account. Devon's company was collapsing, and Taylor finally understood that the man she had trusted had built an entire life around lies. But consequences don't arrive all at once. They come in waves. The first wave came at 6:14 Monday morning. My phone rang. It was Daniel Reeves. I answered immediately. "What's happening?" His voice was calm, too calm. The transfer was attempted. I sat upright. "What transfer?" "The $150,000. My stomach dropped. I checked my banking app. The money was still there. I hadn't authorized anything. Daniel continued. "Someone attempted to initiate a transfer using the account information connected to your daughter's name." I looked toward the kitchen. Taylor was asleep in the guest room. For a moment, I couldn't move. Someone had actually tried to use her identity. I asked Daniel whether they knew who did it. He said they were working on it. Then he told me something even worse. The request originated from a device associated with Devon. I felt the anger rise, but I forced it down. Anger wouldn't help Taylor. Anger wouldn't recover anyone's money. And anger certainly wouldn't undo 5 years of damage between me and my daughter. I walked to the guest room. I knocked softly. "Taylor?" No answer. I knocked again. She opened the door. Her eyes were swollen. She looked like she hadn't slept. I said, "They tried to transfer the money." Her face went completely white. "What?" I showed her the message from Daniel. She covered her mouth. "I didn't do that." "I know." She started crying.
Not the angry crying I had seen at the restaurant, not the desperate crying from the night Devon was exposed. This was different. It was the realization that her choices had put her in a situation she couldn't simply walk away from. She whispered, "Dad, what happens now?" I looked at her. "Now you tell the truth." She nodded. That morning, Taylor met with Daniel and the investigators. I wasn't in the room for the entire interview. I waited outside for almost 3 hours. When she finally walked out, she looked exhausted, but there was something different in her face. For the first time, she wasn't trying to defend herself. She was accepting what she had done. She admitted that she had helped Devon pressure me. She admitted that she had lied about the reason for the money. And she admitted that she had ignored warning signs because she wanted the life Devon had promised her. But she also told investigators that she had never knowingly participated in his financial crimes. That distinction mattered. The investigation continued. By Tuesday, the news had become national. Devon's name appeared in financial reports. Victims began coming forward. People who had trusted him with their retirement savings. Parents, small business owners, widows, people who couldn't afford to lose what they had lost. And suddenly, the $150,000 demand looked completely different. It wasn't a rich man's request for help. It was one more attempt to keep an operation alive. Then came the arrest. I was sitting in my living room when the news interrupted the program. Federal agents have arrested financial advisor Devon Blake following an investigation into alleged wire fraud and embezzlement. The screen showed him being escorted from a building. His hands were cuffed. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His head was down. For months, he had convinced people he was untouchable. Now, he couldn't even walk out of a building by himself. Taylor stood behind me. She watched the screen. Neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "That's him." I looked at her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She simply looked empty. The reporter continued. Investigators believed Devon had used multiple accounts and corporate entities to move money between investors. Several accounts had been frozen. More charges were expected. Then the reporter mentioned something that made Taylor sit down. Her name. Not as a suspect, as someone investigators believed had been manipulated into helping Devon solicit money from a family member. Taylor closed her eyes. The public humiliation had begun. Again. Only this time, she knew she had played a part in creating the situation. She looked at me. "Everyone is going to know." I said, "Maybe. They're going to think I'm like him." I sat beside her. "Then tell the truth." She looked at me. "What if they don't believe me?" I answered, "You can't control what people believe." I paused. "You can control whether you're honest from this point forward." She nodded. That afternoon, she deleted almost everything from her social media. The photographs, the engagement announcements, the expensive dinners, the vacations, the posts where she had proudly called Devon her future husband. All of it disappeared. But deleting photographs doesn't delete consequences. Her friends stopped answering. People she thought were close to her suddenly became strangers. The venue canceled the wedding. The deposits were gone. The apartment she shared with Devon was locked down as part of the investigation, and the life she had spent years building around him disappeared in less than a week. But there was one consequence she hadn't expected. She lost me again. Not because I abandoned her, because I refused to pretend everything was fixed. One night, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where this entire nightmare had started. She looked at me. "Do you forgive me?" I thought about it. Then I answered honestly, "I'm trying." She looked down. I continued, "Forgiveness doesn't mean I forget what happened." She nodded. "I know that. And it doesn't mean I give you money every time you're in trouble." She gave a small, painful smile. "I know that too." I reached across the table. This time she took my hand. "But you're still my daughter," I said. She started crying, and for the first time I let her cry without trying to fix everything.
because maybe that was the lesson I had failed to learn as a father. You can love someone deeply and still let them experience the consequences of their choices. You can open the door without carrying them through it. You can forgive without forgetting. And sometimes saying no is the hardest way of saying I love you. 3 days later, Daniel called me again. He told me they had found the person behind the attempted transfer. It wasn't Devon. It was someone I never expected. Someone who had been connected to Taylor long before she met him. Someone who knew about my money. Someone who knew exactly how much I had. I asked Daniel who it was. He said, "You should sit down before I tell you." I was already sitting. Then he said the name, Evelyn, Taylor's mother. I couldn't speak, because suddenly the story I thought I understood was about to change one more time.
The name hit me harder than anything Devon had done. Evelyn, Taylor's mother, my ex-wife, the woman who had spent years telling our daughter that I was selfish, that I was cheap, that I didn't love them enough. For a few seconds, I couldn't even process what Daniel had said. I asked him to repeat it. He did. Evelyn Anderson appears to have had access to information connected to the attempted transfer. I felt something inside me go completely still. I asked the question I had been afraid to ask. Was she working with Devon? Daniel didn't answer immediately. That silence told me enough. "We believe there may have been communication between them," he finally said, "but we need more evidence." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat there in the dark. 28 years of memories with Evelyn suddenly looked different. The divorce, the arguments, the things she had said about me. The way Taylor's attitude toward me had changed over the years. I had always assumed Evelyn was simply bitter. Maybe she was. But now I wondered whether bitterness had been only part of the story. I called Taylor. She answered almost immediately. "Dad?" I said, "I need to ask you something." She could hear something in my voice. "What happened?" I told her. Silence. Then she whispered, "Mom?" I said, "Daniel believes she may have been involved." Taylor didn't speak for several seconds. Then she said something that shocked me. "Dad, I knew she knew about Devon." My heart dropped. "What do you mean?" Taylor started crying. She told me that Evelyn had met Devon several times, not casually, not by accident. They had discussed money. They had discussed the wedding. And, according to Taylor, her mother had repeatedly told her that I had more money than I admitted. She had told Taylor that I was afraid of losing control, that if Taylor pushed hard enough, I would eventually pay. I asked Taylor why she had never told me. She said, "Because I thought Mom was right." That sentence hurt, not because I was surprised, because I realized how long the lie had been growing. 5 years of silence hadn't started at the restaurant. It had started much earlier. The restaurant was simply where everything finally became impossible to hide. Taylor opened her phone. She showed me a series of messages between her and Evelyn. The oldest one was from months earlier. Evelyn had written, "Your father will never volunteer money. You have to make him feel like he's losing you." I stared at the screen. Then another message. "Use the wedding. He'll want to be part of it." Another. "Don't ask for 50. Ask for something big enough to scare him." Then came the message that made my hands go cold. "If he refuses, Devon knows what to do." I looked at Taylor. "What does that mean?" She shook her head. "I don't know." But now I knew where to look. I called Daniel again. I told him about the messages. This time he didn't tell me to wait. He told me to preserve everything. Within hours, investigators had enough information to connect Evelyn to Devon's operation, not as the mastermind, not as someone running the entire scheme, but as someone who had knowingly helped manipulate her own daughter into pressuring me for money. And there was more. Evelyn had received money from one of Devon's companies, payments disguised as consulting fees, several of them. The amounts weren't enormous, but they were consistent, regular, and timed around conversations involving me. I sat in my kitchen reading the records. Then I realized something. The $150,000 hadn't been the beginning. It had been the final attempt. They had been preparing Taylor to believe that getting money from me was normal, that I owed her, that my wealth belonged to her, that my refusal was evidence that I didn't love her. They had turned my daughter against me and then tried to turn her against herself. I called Taylor. She was sitting in the guest room. I asked her to come downstairs. When she sat across from me, I put the documents on the table. She looked at them. Then she covered her face. "I didn't know." I said, "I believe you." She looked up. I continued, "But you still made the choice." She nodded. Tears rolled down her face. "I know." For the first time, neither of us tried to blame someone else. Not Devon, not Evelyn, not the past, not even me. Taylor finally said, "Dad, I think I became the person Mom told me you were." That sentence broke my heart. I reached across the table. "No." She looked at me. I continued, "You became someone who made bad choices." I paused. "That's different." She cried, and I realized something. Maybe that was the real second climax of the entire story. The first betrayal had been money. The second betrayal had been trust. But the deepest betrayal was convincing someone you love that they were only worth what they could take from you. I looked at my daughter. Then I said the words I should have said years earlier. "Taylor, you never owed me perfection." She stared at me. "You never had to earn my love." Her face collapsed. "I just wish I knew that." I squeezed her hand. "Now you do." But there was still one thing I hadn't told her. I had already spoken to Daniel, and the next morning, Evelyn was going to be questioned. Taylor looked at me. "What happens to Mom?" I took a long breath. That's not my decision anymore. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't going to fight my ex-wife. I wasn't going to expose her publicly. I wasn't going to destroy her. I was simply going to tell the truth and let the truth do what it had been waiting to do. Because sometimes revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. Sometimes revenge is refusing to lie for them anymore. And the next morning, when Evelyn walked into that federal office, she had no idea that her own daughter had already handed investigators the evidence that could bring everything down.
The next morning, I woke up with a decision I never thought I would have to make. Not about the money, not about Devon, not even about Evelyn. It was about my daughter. Because for the first time in my life, helping Taylor meant I had to decide how much help was actually helping her. At 8:17 that morning, my phone rang. It was Taylor. Her voice was quiet. "Dad, I talked to the investigators." I sat down. "What did they say?" She took a breath. "They said I have to tell them everything." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Then tell them everything." She was silent. Then she asked, "Even if it hurts Mom?" That question stayed with me, because 5 years earlier, I would have told her to protect her mother. I would have told her to keep the family together. I would have tried to make everyone happy. But I had learned something during those 5 years. Sometimes protecting someone from the truth doesn't protect them at all. It only makes the consequences bigger when the truth finally comes out. So I said, "Yes." Her voice cracked.
even if it destroys everything? I answered, if the truth destroys it, Taylor, then the truth didn't destroy it. I paused. The lie did. She started crying. I let her. I didn't try to stop her. I didn't tell her everything would be okay, because I couldn't promise that. Her marriage was gone. Her relationship with her mother might never be the same. Her reputation had been damaged, and she had to face the fact that she had deliberately manipulated her own father. Those were consequences no amount of money could erase. Then she asked the question I had been expecting. Will you help me? I closed my eyes. This was the moment where the old me would have reached for my checkbook. The old me would have paid for the apartment, paid the lawyers, paid every bill, paid whatever was necessary to make the pain disappear. But the old me had spent 5 years believing that love meant fixing everything, and it hadn't worked. So I said, yes. She exhaled. Then I continued, but not the way you think. She became quiet. I'm not giving you $150,000. She didn't argue. I could hear her breathing. I'm not paying for another luxury life. Silence. I'm not fixing the consequences of what happened. Then I said the part that mattered. But I will help you rebuild. She whispered, what does that mean? I told her. I would pay for the therapy she needed. I would help her find a safe place to live. I would make sure she had food. I would help her get back on her feet. But everything else, she would have to earn. She would have to work. She would have to face the investigation. She would have to tell the truth. And most importantly, she would have to become responsible for her own life. There was a long silence. Then Taylor said, you're really not going to save me? I smiled sadly. No. She started crying again. You're going to teach me how to save myself. I looked down at the kitchen table. That was the first time in 5 years that I felt like I was finally talking to my daughter again. Not the woman Devin had shaped. Not the daughter Evelyn had taught to measure love in dollars. Just Taylor, my little girl. Older now, hurting, but still there. I told her, you don't need to earn your way back into this family. She whispered, then what do I need to do? I answered, tell the truth. She said, okay. And that was her choice. She could have lied. She could have protected Devin. She could have protected Evelyn. She could have blamed me. She could have disappeared. Instead, she chose the truth. And I made my choice too. I chose to forgive my daughter. But forgiveness came with a boundary. I would love her. I would help her. I would be there when she fell. But I would no longer carry her. Because there is a difference between being someone's father and becoming the person responsible for every decision they make. That afternoon, Taylor went back to the investigators. She handed over everything. The messages, the emails, the account information, the conversations with Devin, and the conversations with Evelyn. It wasn't easy, but she did it. And when she came home that evening, she looked exhausted. She walked into the kitchen. I was making coffee. She stood there for a moment. Then she said, Dad? I turned around. She smiled through tears. Can I have breakfast with you tomorrow? I smiled. You don't have to ask. She nodded, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't ask me for money. She didn't ask me to solve something. She didn't ask me to rescue her. She simply asked to be my daughter again. And somehow, that was worth more than the $150,000 ever could have been. But I learned something else, something I wish I had understood much earlier. Sometimes, the hardest choice isn't whether to leave someone. It's whether to love them differently. Because loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from every consequence. It doesn't mean saying yes every time they ask. And it doesn't mean destroying yourself to prove that you care. Sometimes love sounds like yes. Sometimes love sounds like no.
And sometimes the most loving thing you can say is, "I will stand beside you, but I will not carry you." So now, I want to ask you something. If you were in my position and your own child betrayed your trust, demanded $150,000 and then came back after everything collapsed, would you forgive them? Would you help them rebuild? Or would 5 years of betrayal be too much? There isn't an easy answer. Maybe you would say no. Maybe you'd open the door. Maybe you've already faced a decision like this in your own family. Whatever your answer is, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Tell me in the comments, because someone reading your story tonight might be standing at the exact same crossroads, and maybe your experience is the thing they need to hear. If this story made you feel something, hit the like button. If you want more stories about betrayal, family, consequences, and the choices people make when everything falls apart, subscribe to Tribal Survival Feast. And share this story with someone who needs to hear one simple truth. Sometimes saying no isn't the opposite of love. Sometimes it's the only way love survives. This is Tribal Survival Feast. Every betrayal leaves a scar. Every choice has a consequence. And every family has a story.